Can you see her? By rooms. Jenny and I had been friends for a very long time. We first met each other in elementary school, and we knew each other's parents very well. We later even ended up going to the same university. Her major was different from mine, but that didn't stop us from being roommates for 4 years. We were best friends. One day, during our final year in college, Jenny told me that she was seeing something strange. "There's this woman," said Jenny. "She's really far away, but Jenny could still see her somehow. The woman wears a white robe and she doesn't do anything. She just stands there, simply looking right at Jenny." At first I paid very little attention to it. As days went by, however, Jenny started mentioning about this woman more frequently. She would point to the complete void and ask me whether or not I could see her. Jenny said that the woman seemed to be getting closer and closer every day. All of this sounded so silly to me that I burst into laughter. I guess Jenny knew how ridiculous it sounded as well, and laughed along. Toward the end of the semester, however, Jenny became increasingly restless. Except when going to her classes, she rarely left our room. She became very reserved and irritable. We often got into arguments because she blamed me for not taking her seriously. She said that the woman's clothes are getting darker and darker as she's getting closer. She was now close enough so that Jenny could clearly see the woman's face. Her eyes were wide open and bulging, but she never blinks. Her face is dead pale with a hue of grey, and she's always smiling. Her lips are stretched out into a disturbingly unnatural grin, as if she's being forced to smile against her will. What could I say in response to this? I didn't think Jenny was lying or playing around, but at the same time the woman wasn't visible to my eyes. After graduation I went on to grad school, while Jenny decided to take a year off due to her symptoms. She stayed home with her parents and never left her room, so I had to visit her just so I could say hi to her. According to Jenny's mum, Jenny apparently called the police a few days prior, saying that a strange woman is standing outside her house. When the police arrived, they didn't see any woman, and Jenny was almost arrested for filing a false report. I told her mum what's been happening with Jenny over the past several months. Concerned about her psychological health, Jenny's parents decided to take her to the hospital for an evaluation. After several lab tests and imaging studies, Jenny was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She was to be referred to a psychiatrist. The doctor showed Jenny's parents the MRI images and PET scan results, and told them that her symptoms were quite severe. He strongly recommended hospitalization for close monitoring. After 4 months of aggressive treatment, Jenny seemed to have gotten so much better. When I visited her on her last day at the hospital, she giggled and joked around like she always used to. She no longer complained about the strange woman anymore, and it seemed like she was back to her normal self. A day after Jenny was discharged home, however, I received a call from her. "She's back," said Jenny in a trembling voice that was about to burst into tears. When I arrived at Jenny's that evening, she was crawled into a fetal position in her bed, wrapped up in her blanket. Jenny's parents were planning on taking her back to the hospital first thing in the morning. This time it was much worse. Jenny told me that the woman was now in the same room, standing right next to her. The woman was so close to Jenny that if she were to extend her arm, she'd be able to touch her. Jenny said that the woman's clothes were now very black, and this time she was frowning as if she was extremely upset about something. I looked around the room, and as usual, there was nothing there. "I'm scared. I'm so scared. Help me, please help me." I stood there completely bewildered, not knowing what to do or what to say. That was my last memory of her. A couple of days after the incident, I received a call from Jenny's mum. Jenny had passed away. The cause was cardiac arrest. At Jenna's funeral, several questions crossed my mind. Was the woman who killed Jenny real? If we suggest solely based on Jenny's claim that the woman was indeed real, then a multitude of other questions become relevant. Who was she? Why was she haunting Jenny in particular? What did she want? Did Jenny truly have schizophrenia? Or was it a misdiagnosis of a paranormal phenomenon? If I had helped her get treatments earlier, would that have done anything to save her? Maybe, or maybe not. Or perhaps the woman wasn't real. We could play the devil's advocate and state that the woman was a mere hallucination, accompanying Jenna's alleged schizophrenia. But that would nonetheless lead to an inconclusive dead end. What does the real world mean, and who defines it? I could flirt with the assumption that whatever the entity that Jenny was seeing was all in her head, and that it was nothing more than a product of her imagination. But that doesn't mean that it was any less real. When Jenny was diagnosed with schizophrenia, the PET scan images showed hyperactivities in several different parts of her brain. That alone constitutes a physical proof that the world Jenny was seeing and experiencing was in fact very real to her. I still vividly recall the pure fear in our eyes. The woman was neither visible to me, nor did I ever feel her presence. However, our perception of reality can vastly differ from one person to another. What is not real to someone may very well be perceived as real for someone else, and therefore it would be foolish on my part to accuse Jenny, purely based on my own sensory perception, that she's wrong. Despite our tendency to establish a general consensus of what is real versus not real, according to the majority's observation, what pertains to our senses alone, that is, something that's visible, tangible, audible, and related to physical aspects in general, does not accurately depict the entirety of what we commonly refer to as reality. The truth is that we live in a world in which everyone creates his or her own reality within it. The concept of reality shouldn't be regarded as one single true entity that is applicable for all, but rather as a myriad collection of independent subjective units. These boundaries of individualized reality are very difficult to be encroached upon by someone other than the self, and as such, it makes the escape from it just as difficult. Perhaps this is what ultimately fills our world with so much uncertainty and fear. I saw something in the woods I can't explain. By Mr. Toast 98. So, I'm still a bit shaken up from what happened. I have no clue what I saw, and I just want some answers. I guess I should explain. My family has managed to keep its hand on a good chunk of land out in the middle of a Choco National Forest. It's a beautiful place down there, but it's got its problems. There's no cell service, no paved roads, and the closest person to us is miles away. Basically, if anything happens out there, you're screwed. Still, the escape from the world and the beauty there is absolutely incredible. I've been going since I was a kid with my dad, and everything was great. I remember sitting around the campfire and hearing coyotes all around us. It scared me a little, but I was comforted by it in a weird way. We usually were never disturbed. Most you'd see out there is a couple of ATVs, maybe a cougar, but that's it. But everything changed last weekend. My dad and I went down to the property to check on how things were holding up. We do this sort of thing all the time. You need to with a place like this. The place was turning 100, and it seems nature is trying to take it back. It's infested with rats, and termites are starting to eat it. It's sad to see the place I spent so much time as a kid be in a state like this, but I was doing something about it at least. On the drive there, I started noticing a few deer carcasses, fresh ones. It's nothing unusual around there, just Mother Nature taking its course, but something about it gave me a weird vibe. To make matters weirder, we found pretty big prints in the gravel around our place. My dad had been up here for years, and he said he's never seen a print like that. We chalked it up to some hikers playing a joke or something. Nothing else major happened that day, but I had some great times with my dad that day. He's been having a rough time. He had a bad car crash last month, and he's had surgery after surgery to try and fix his back with absolutely no results. He smiled for the first time in a long while, and I'm just glad I could be there for him. The next day I noticed more deer carcasses. A lot more, and nearer to the cabin. The poor things were absolutely mutilated. My dad, figuring it was some creep stalking us, tried firing some shots to scare whoever it was off. The gun was jammed though, so he gave it a rest. Later that night, my dad and I built up a nice little fire and started talking. It was fun, but I noticed a sound. We both froze up right there. The sound of it. I've been there most of my life, and I've never heard something like that. Imagine a woman screaming, mix it with a boar, and put it through the fires of hell. That's what that thing sounded like. We put out the fire and ran to our car, locking all the doors. I realized we left the gun out near the campfire, but my dad kept me from running out there. We ended up sleeping there that night, and after a few sleepless hours I finally passed out. The next day there were more deer carcasses. It was different though. All the bodies were piled outside the cabin, like someone put them there, like they wanted us to see. What's worse, our gun had disappeared. We dragged off the corpses, trying to stay calm, and started working again. The day was long and hot, but we made good work. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the bodies, about the sound last night. I could tell that my dad was shaken up too. Not that he'd admit it. We decided not to light a fire that night, in case whatever that sound was came back. The car was cramped, but I figured it was better than staying out with whatever that thing is. It had been a few hours, we had fallen asleep and everything was alright. Later that night though, I got woken up by a sound. I laid there for a few minutes, too scared to lift my head. All I could do was think of those deers, that sound. I braced myself and sat up. That's when I locked eyes with the thing. It was probably 8 or 9 feet tall, and while the moon was bright that night, whatever it is soaked up the light with its pitch black fur. All I could see was its 2 milky white eyes and its smile. Oh, its fucking smile. It was grinning ear to ear, and it was staring straight at me. I couldn't look away as it slowly lifted its finger to its mouth, like it was shushing me. It slowly turned and strode off in steps that were way too long. I couldn't dare let myself move until I lost sight of the thing. We left that same night. Now, I'm a reasonable person. I don't just see things. I know what I saw out there. I'm terrified to go out there again, but I need to know what's going on there. Edit. Okay, so I got a knock on my door, and I found this note. What the fuck is going on here? Edit 2. Okay, so some of you noticed there was stuff on the back, so I tried to get a good shot of what it was on, but my phone died. I can tell you guys that it's a letter from the hospital about my dad's back surgery. The numbers people mentioned were scribbled all over the paper. I couldn't tell what they meant, but I noticed there was GPS coordinates. It leads to some empty lot. I'm not sure I should go there, but what do you guys think? I've also seen that you guys think this thing might be a skinwalker. I'll be heading back to the cabin this Wednesday, so I'll be sure to bring a shaman with me. The Exterminator by Void Flesh. I sniffed the air and wrinkled my nose, rolling up my window. Farms were the worst place to work. Hated going to them, hated apple picking, hated everything about them, except the food that eventually got to my mouth. I took a look at the fence as I drove up the long driveway. It was broken right through the middle. Lots of chunks splintered about. I smiled, already putting pieces together. Janice, the proprietor of this establishment, came out to meet me as I pulled up and stepped out of my van into the fetid night air. Her white hair spoke one story, while her solid walk and physique told another. I knew Janice by acquaintance and had been referred to her for her current problem. "How are you this evening, sir?" she drawled, wearing a cap despite there being no sun left. I swear to God, if she spit tobacco, I would turn around and leave. "Evening, Miss Janice. I heard you had a problem with some pests," I said to her in my most polite, yet let's hurry this along, southern comfort that I could muster. She purred. She was dragging this out for sure. "Got someone breaking my fences, letting my animals out. Slaughtered one or two. It's costing me plenty," she said. Oh great, the haggling had already started. "Well," I hitched up my pants in my most professional pose. "It looks like you got a case of the goat man for sure. Splinters on the fence I saw on the way in, trampled dirt, murdered animals." Janice pondered over this for a moment, looking off and to the right. "I can't pay much, you know. I've got feed to buy coming up soon." "Well, you're gonna have less feed to buy if you don't have a big stock of animals to sell," I countered. "You sure it's a goat man? I haven't heard of them in these parts for quite some time," she said. I groaned inwardly. "I can take a closer look, but you've got all the signs of it. If you want me to do a full inspection, that costs," I said. No. I'll pay for the goat man removal, that's fine. I trust your judgment in these matters." She smiled. "Well," I said, a bit stunned, "I'll start tonight." I expected a bit of fight from Janice, but perhaps my friend put in a good word for me. I pushed for quality over nickel and diming. It saved on haggling. If the person went too low in price, I just packed up. The price per arrangement was more than enough to hold me over, and put a chunk into retirement. My speciality was both in demand and low in supply. After writing the check and signing the usual non-disclosure forms, she huddled away into her house. I highly recommended customers don't sit around to watch the work. Too many liabilities, and a lot more paperwork. Honestly, here in the South, I think it's the paperwork alone that keeps them indoors. Southerners are a curious folk. I took another look at the fence before setting up the wires and traps. The fence was so goddamn old I couldn't make out all the marks, but the splinters around it said Angry Goat Man to me. Not that there's any other type besides an Angry Goat Man. A few short hours later I was holed up in the barn listening to the crickets sing their love, pounding my first energy drink of the night. It stank less in here, kept clean and half full of machinery. Expensive machinery. I could have charged double for this job. The boredom ticked away at my sanity as I waited, screwing around on my phone with some offline games. No internet connection for me, despite the satellite dish and Janice's Wi-Fi signal sitting right there. It was just rude to ask for a password if they didn't offer one. The first sound I heard was crunching at the door. The lights were dimmed, but I was ready to flick them on full blast once it was in. The door rattled and slowly opened. It slipped in, almost double my 6-foot frame. But where was its axe? Shadows shivered back and forth and I triggered the trap, the door shutting behind it and the lights going full blast. A large, hunched creature stood before me on all fours. Spines were coming out of its back, reaching for the arched ceiling of the farmhouse. It turned on me and wailed. Its blood-red eyes narrowed and locked onto me, but its empty and massive nasal passage was really pointing the way. Unholy gods. A chupacabra. It stepped in the second trap, and I was almost too late in triggering it, fumbling with the switch and flicking it. The netting went up and around it, dragging it to the ceiling in one fell swoop, the spines scraping against the metal roofing. "I am nothing if not prepared," I said to the creature, although it was too dumb to understand. "Always use the double reinforced cable netting, even if you're just catching a goat man." I began assembling the cage below. Portability was the wonder of the future. Scrabbling above me got my attention. The chupacabra was chewing through my very expensive wire netting, one strand at a time. What do they even feed you? Oh. The blocks began falling into place. That's why Janice hadn't fought me on the inspection, of which a glance at the animals would have shown chupacabra activity, bodies drained of blood, and of course nearly triple the goddamn price. It dropped from the ceiling, and I had only a second to roll out of the way. It fell heavily to the ground, nearly impaling me on its spikes. It began to thrash in the remaining netting, and I rushed to the switch and popped the locked door open again, grabbing my emergency bag, dumping it on the ground and pushing things out of the way. The creature screeched triumphantly. "What the fuck?" Startled, I turned around to find Janice in the doorway, her eyes wide. The chupacabra only a dozen feet away. It crouched down, its front low and its back high, pushing its spines out to the limit, and it wiggled its behind for a moment before springing into the air. The front half of the creature was nothing but gore, and my ears were ringing from the sound of the explosive shells finding their mark. Janice dripped with chupacabra juices. Finally, something that smelled worse than her farm. I picked up my supplies as Janice stood still, her mouth moving but no words coming out. Taking a last look around, I patted her arm. "Nice equipment you have, Janice. Real high-quality stuff you have. It's double for all future contracts for not releasing pertinent details. Read your contract." I didn't tell her how hard it was to get the smell out of your clothes. Worse than skunk. "You have a nice night now, Janice." I smiled to myself as I rolled away in my van.